The vastness of space had once been a source of endless wonder. Now, to Commander Charlie Reed, it felt like a burial ground, a place where humanity's last, fading breath echoed across the stars. His fleet, Earth's last remaining hope, limped through the blackness, a ragtag collection of ships patched together with what little was left of the once mighty Star Fleet. "That's the last of it," Lieutenant Andrea Torres muttered under her breath, her fingers tapping quickly across the holographic interface in front of her. "All systems are on emergency mode. We're just barely hanging on, Commander." Reed didn't need to look at the monitor to know what she meant. He'd seen the damage, felt it in his bones as the Vanguard shook with every passing minute of the long, drawn-out retreat. The starboard engine was barely functioning. Hull breaches were patched with makeshift materials. The once proud flagship of Earth's fleet, now nothing more than a battered relic, drifted aimlessly through the void. "We need a win," Reed said, rubbing his temples. The weight of 100 lost battles, of countless lives extinguished by the Gorther Empire, rested heavily on his shoulders. "What's the status on the crew?" Torres didn't look up. "Morale's shot. No one's talking about it, but we're all thinking the same thing. How much longer can we keep this up?" "We don't have much longer," Reed agreed grimly, glancing out through the viewport at the endless stars. "But I didn't get this far just to roll over and die." A soft chuckle escaped Torres's lips, though it lacked any real mirth. "You've never been one to quit, sir. I'll give you that." Reed didn't respond. There was no point in arguing. The truth was, he knew that the last remnants of Earth's fleet were on borrowed time. Every fleet battle had been a losing one. Every retreat a step closer to extinction. And even now, as they fled the carnage of another failed battle against the Gorther, the situation only seemed to worsen, but there was a whisper of hope, a whisper that had come from an unlikely source. "Sir, you need to see this," Torres said suddenly, breaking his reverie. Reed's heart skipped a beat as she turned the holoconsole toward him. A map of the galaxy filled the display, dotted with countless star systems, each one a graveyard, each one a battleground in the war against the Gorther. But at the very edge of the map, there was a strange anomaly. A new star system, one that no human had charted before. "What is this?" Reed asked, his voice laced with curiosity. "We didn't pick this up on the previous scans." "No, sir. We missed it. This is a jump point, according to the analysis. It's new. Uncharted." Torres's fingers flew across the console. "And the readings are strange. But most importantly, there's a planet." Reed leaned in closer, his pulse quickening. "A planet?" Torres nodded. "A planet that's emitting energy. A massive amount of energy." Reed's mind raced. The legend. The stories whispered among the scattered survivors of Earth, the planet of endless energy. He dismissed it as a myth, a tale to comfort the desperate. "But now, how long until we can reach it?" "Less than a week if we push the engines," Torres replied, her fingers still flying across the interface. "But it's risky. The last jump we made nearly tore us apart." Reed considered the options. Earth was dying. The fleet was dying. If this was a trap, they had nothing left to lose. But if it was real, it could be humanity's last chance. "We go. Full speed ahead," Reed said, his voice resolute. "Prepare the crew. We're not retreating this time." The next days aboard the Vanguard were a blur of activity. The crew, once sullen and quiet, suddenly had a spark of purpose again. The briefing rooms were filled with a renewed energy, even if they were all secretly afraid this might be another false hope. Still, they pressed forward. Everyone knew what was at stake, Earth's last chance for survival. Lieutenant Torres worked around the clock, trying to adjust the ship's jump capabilities to the unstable anomaly they were about to cross. It wasn't a matter of just going through the jump point, It was more like trying to dive headfirst into a riptide with no guarantee that they would emerge on the other side. As the days passed, Reed found himself caught in moments of introspection, wondering if he was making the right choice. His thoughts often returned to the faces of those who had died, the civilians and soldiers alike who had given their lives in a war they never asked for, and there was one face he couldn't shake, Admiral Juno, his mentor, whose last words still haunted him. "Don't let them take Earth, Charlie. Whatever you do, don't let them win." Reed stood alone on the observation deck, staring out into the endless black. He thought of Earth, now a distant memory, a planet that might no longer exist by the time the fleet returned. If they returned, sir? Torres's voice interrupted his thoughts, and he turned to see her standing behind him, a flicker of concern in her eyes. "We're almost there," she said softly. "Ready to jump." The transition through the jump point was anything but smooth. As the fleet crossed into the unknown, Reed could feel the strain on the ship's hull, hear the groan of metal as the Vanguard fought against the gravitational forces pulling it into the unknown. It was the roughest jump they had ever made, nothing like the precision of their old fleet, nothing like the victories they had once enjoyed, and then, just as quickly as the chaos began, it was over. The turbulence subsided, and they emerged into a new star system, bathed in the light of an unfamiliar sun. Reed's heart skipped a beat as he gazed out the viewport. The planet was just as the map had shown, lush, green, and brimming with the energy that had so captivated them, but as they approached the planet's atmosphere, something else became apparent. There was a ship. A massive, alien vessel in orbit, darker than the void itself, brimming with weapons and technology that Reed could barely comprehend. "Commander," Torres's voice trembled with urgency. "We're not alone. The planet, it's occupied." Reed's gaze hardened. They had hoped for a quiet, easy victory, but instead, they had found something far more dangerous, a new enemy. The cold, artificial light of the Vanguard flickered momentarily as the command deck plunged into tense silence. Reed's eyes remained fixed on the viewport, where the massive alien vessel loomed like a dark predator in orbit around the planet. The sight sent a chill through him, and not just from the ship's overwhelming size. There was something alien about it, something that went beyond mere technology, like a malign presence that seeped into the atmosphere itself. "Torres," Reed said, his voice low, steady despite the chaos raging inside him, "give me a full scan. I want to know everything about that ship. Weapons, shields, anything we can use." "Aye, sir." Torres's fingers flew across the console, her face set in grim determination. The crew of the Vanguard had seen their share of battles, but nothing like this. The Gorther, the enemy that had driven Earth to the brink of annihilation, had always been one step ahead. Now, it seemed, they had encountered something even more dangerous. "Commander," Torres said, her voice betraying a hint of disbelief, "this isn't just a warship, it's a capital ship. A mobile fortress. The weapon systems alone could obliterate our fleet in seconds. And its energy signature, it's unlike anything we've ever encountered." "How unlike?" Reed asked, already knowing it was bad. He could feel the sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. "Sir, it's not just energy, it's reactive. Adaptive," Torres continued, her eyes scanning the data pouring in. "It seems to harness energy in ways that bend the laws of physics. This ship it's alive, Commander. I don't know how else to explain it." Reed's stomach tightened. He had no illusions about the human race's standing in the galaxy. Earth was barely holding on, its fleet nothing but a shadow of its former strength. But this was something else. Something far beyond the Gorther, even beyond the myths of the endless energy planet. Did we just stumble into the middle of their empire? Reed murmured to himself, more to release the pressure building inside his mind than to expect an answer. Before Torres could respond, the ship lurched, throwing the entire crew off balance. Warning lights blinked frantically across the control panels. "What the hell was that?" Reed barked. "Gravitational anomaly," Torres shouted, struggling to regain control. Something's messing with our propulsion systems. We're being dragged toward the planet's surface. Abort the approach. Reed ordered, gripping the edge of the console as the ship groaned under the strain. Now. But it was too late. The Vanguard was already falling toward the planet. Reverse thrusters are failing. Torres's voice was tight with panic as she worked furiously at her station. The alien ship is pulling us in, sir. Whatever's happening, it's beyond our control. The bridge crew was in chaos, their frantic voices barely audible over the alarms blaring in the background. Reed remained calm, even as the reality of their situation set in. They were trapped. A helpless, floating target in the vast emptiness of space. The Vanguard was no match for this alien force, and there was no escape. He turned to Torres, his voice now firm and commanding. Prepare to engage evasive maneuvers. Get us out of here, no matter what it takes. But Torres was already shaking her head. We can't, sir. I can't fight it. We're being pulled. Something on that ship is affecting our systems, maybe even our minds. Reed felt a knot tighten in his chest. The thought that they might be up against a force capable of not only dominating their technology but also their very wills was a cold one. His eyes flicked to the view outside the bridge windows, watching as the planet's surface grew ever closer. The alien ship, like some dark sentinel, loomed overhead, an immovable force. Damage reports. Reed demanded. We're taking hits to the hull, reported Lieutenant Commander Kalik, the ship's engineer. Shields are at 30%, and the gravity well is warping the surrounding spacetime. If this keeps up, we'll lose the entire section. Reed's mind raced. His options were dwindling rapidly. There was no way they could fight their way out of this. And if they didn't do something fast, the Vanguard, and the last remnants of humanity, would be lost. All hands, prepare for impact, Reed said, his voice resolute. Get the escape pods ready, but don't abandon ship yet. I need you all focused on one thing, survival. We fight for Earth. Torres looked up sharply. Sir, there's something, but before she could finish, a deep, resonating hum filled the air. The lights flickered once more, and a sudden tremor shot through the entire ship. The pull grew stronger. Reed's heart pounded in his chest as he realized what was happening. The alien vessel had deployed a tractor beam, a weapon of unimaginable power that seemed to distort both space and time itself. We're losing control, Torres gasped, slamming her hand against the console in frustration. We're not going to survive this, Commander. We're not dead yet, Reed muttered under his breath, barely hearing her words. His mind was already calculating their options, weighing every possible move. Sir. Kalik's voice snapped Reed from his thoughts. That ship's moving. It's coming down toward us. Reed's heart stopped. The alien capital ship was descending into the atmosphere, and it wasn't stopping. He could only imagine what kind of power it possessed to control both the gravity of the planet and their ship systems with such precision. Suddenly, the bridge was rocked by another blast, a shockwave that sent the crew tumbling. Reed barely managed to grab onto the armrest of his seat as the lights flickered out completely, plunging the room into darkness. Report. Reed's voice was sharp as he tried to regain control. We've lost power to the lower decks, Kalik responded, his voice grim. Emergency systems are online, but we're barely holding together. In the silence that followed, the reality of their situation hit hard. They were trapped, with no clear way to fight back. The alien ship's presence was suffocating, its power far beyond anything humanity had ever faced, but Reed wouldn't give up. Not now. Not when Earth's survival hung in the balance. He couldn't let his crew see him falter. He turned to Torres, who was still working feverishly at her console, her face a mask of concentration. Lieutenant, Reed said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. We need to find a way to get back to that planet. This is our last shot. If we can land on that surface, we might stand a chance of survival." Torres blinked, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You want to land? On that planet? You saw the readings, this isn't just an invasion. This is something more, something we've never encountered." "I don't care," Reed shot back, his tone unyielding. "We have no choice. We fight, or we die. We're not running anymore." As if on cue, the alien ship's shadow fell over the Vanguard. The gravitational pull grew stronger, and Reed could hear the thrusters straining against the force, but they were powerless to resist. "Brace for impact," Reed shouted. The Vanguard bucked violently as the tractor beam wrenched them toward the planet, and the crew held on for dear life as the ship systems struggled to maintain control. Then, just as quickly as the madness had begun, the pull ceased. The ship came to an abrupt halt in midair, suspended in space just above the planet's atmosphere. Reed's breath caught in his chest as he realized the gravity of what had just happened. The alien ship was gone. A different sound filled the void, the hum of something else, something that felt both ancient and alive. The planet below them was no longer just a place of refuge. It was something else. Something far greater than Reed could comprehend, and in that moment, he knew. The real battle was only just beginning. The Vanguard hung motionless in space, the eerie hum of the alien influence still reverberating through the ship's hull. Reed didn't need to look outside to know that the atmosphere had changed. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach, the subtle shift that told him they were no longer in control. They had come so close to the planet, and yet something had stopped them, something far more powerful than any weapon they had ever encountered. Reed could see the panic creeping into the eyes of his crew, their faces pale in the flickering light of the emergency power systems. No one spoke, but the tension was palpable. Everyone on the bridge felt it, this suffocating realization that the alien vessel was no longer the immediate threat. The planet itself had become the enemy. "Sir," Torres's voice broke through the thick silence. "I'm detecting fluctuations in the planet's electromagnetic field. It's like nothing I've ever seen. It's alive, like the energy field around that ship, only on a planetary scale." Reed's heart pounded. The planet wasn't just a source of endless energy. It was a weapon, a living weapon, and they had just flown right into its grasp. The lights flickered again, and the ship trembled as though responding to some unseen force. Torres's hands moved frantically over her console, but there was nothing she could do to fight the unseen power pulling at them. The ship groaned under the stress, a high-pitched wail echoing through the hull. "We need to get out of here." Calic's voice was edged with panic, his fingers tightening around his console as if he could will the ship to break free. "The systems are failing faster now. We're not going to last much longer under this kind of pressure." Reed's mind raced. Escape was no longer an option, not with the alien ship still lingering, not with whatever force had rooted them to this spot. They had to make a decision, and they had to make it fast. A few more minutes of this and the Vanguard would be torn apart from the inside out. "Lieutenant, what about the planet's surface?" Reed asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "Could we land?" Torres's face tightened. "We could try, but I don't think we'd survive the descent. The gravitational anomalies, they're messing with our systems. If we try to land now, we might not make it past the atmosphere." "We have no choice," Reed said, his voice flat with determination. "Prepare the landing sequence. We go down, now." Torres hesitated only for a moment before nodding. "Aye, sir. But you need to know, the moment we enter the atmosphere, we're on our own. The planet's fields are scrambling our communications, and any maneuvering will be unpredictable." Reed didn't have time for hesitation. "Do it." The ship jolted again, as though the planet was testing them, a warning of what was to come. Torres worked swiftly, directing the ship's thrusters to counteract the gravitational forces as best she could. The view outside the viewport was distorted, the swirling masses of energy and storm clouds a chaotic mess of colors. Even the planet itself seemed to pulse, as though it were alive and watching them. The Vanguard began its descent, a sharp groan of tortured metal filling the air as the ship fought against the invisible hands gripping it. Reed's fingers dug into the armrest of his seat, his knuckles white from the pressure. The crew was silent, each person focused entirely on the task ahead. The view outside the bridge windows grew closer and closer, the swirling clouds of the atmosphere now in full view. Below, the surface of the planet was a sprawling mass of green, interrupted by strange geometric structures, towers that rose high into the sky, their surfaces reflecting a pale light. And amidst the structures, Reed saw something else, a large, dark shape that could only be the alien ship. It had landed, and its imposing presence seemed to cover the entire horizon. "We're coming in too fast," Torres said urgently, her hand struggling to stabilize the ship. "We're going to hit the surface." Before she could finish, the ship lurched again, a sudden, violent shake that rattled everyone to their bones. The engines screamed in protest as the gravitational forces seemed to reverse themselves, pushing them downward with terrifying speed. "Hold on!" Reed shouted, bracing himself as the Vanguard hurtled toward the ground. The ship tore through the atmosphere in a blaze of fire and metal, a hail of shockwaves slamming into the hull from every direction. The planet itself seemed to reject their arrival, the electromagnetic forces pulling and pushing, tugging at them as though the very fabric of reality was being stretched to its limits. Then, with a deafening crash, the Vanguard slammed into the surface. Reed's world turned to chaos. The ship jolted, bucked, and then rolled, metal screeching against the alien terrain. The entire bridge seemed to twist in on itself as the ship skidded across the surface. The warning alarms blared, and Reed could hear the screams of his crew as the ship continued its uncontrolled descent. Finally, the ship came to a violent stop. Silence followed, a strange and suffocating calm settling over everything. Reed's head spun, and for a moment, he was disoriented, his body still bracing for the next impact that never came. Then the reality of their situation hit him like a punch to the gut. The Vanguard was on the ground, its systems offline, its hull breached in several places, and its crew scattered and wounded. The impact had thrown them all into chaos. "Report!" Reed barked, his voice hoarse, his mind struggling to focus. Torres groaned from the floor, shaking her head as she slowly pushed herself up. "We're down, sir. But the damage is severe. The engines are toast, and I've got no comms to speak of. We're isolated." Reed pushed himself to his feet, his legs unsteady from the crash. The bridge was a mess, panels sparking, consoles smashed, and the crew dazed but alive. "Is anyone dead?" "No, sir," Kalec said, his voice strained but steady. "But we're not out of danger yet. The ship's hull integrity is compromised. We need to move quickly." Reed nodded grimly, looking out through the shattered viewport. The landscape before them was nothing like Earth, vast, alien, and oddly beautiful in its strangeness. The ground was covered in an unfamiliar, moss-like substance that shimmered faintly under the dim light. Jagged mountains rose in the distance, and strange, crystalline structures dotted the horizon, but it wasn't the terrain that caught Reed's attention, it was the massive figure standing in the distance, watching them. The alien ship, its dark silhouette still imposing even from this distance, loomed like a silent sentinel. "We're not alone," Reed said softly, more to himself than to the others. Torres nodded, her face pale. "Whatever that ship is, it's not leaving. And if those creatures on it are anything like what we've encountered before," Reed finished her thought in his head, "we're outnumbered, outgunned, and stranded." "We're not giving up," Reed said firmly. "We get to that alien ship, we figure out what's going on, and we take whatever we can to survive." He didn't know if he was trying to convince his crew, or himself, but the words came out with authority. They had no other choice. The Vanguard was crippled, the enemy was already here, and the planet was no sanctuary. But humanity had always survived against impossible odds. They would survive again. Gather what you can, Reed ordered. We move out in 5 minutes. Stay sharp. No one is alone out here. The crew, battered but resilient, moved quickly to gather their equipment, preparing for the unknown. Reed took one last look at the horizon, at the looming alien ship, and at the planet that had just swallowed them whole. Whatever awaited them, they would face it together, and in that moment, Reed knew something deep in his bones: this was just the beginning.